And maybe somebody can just keep an eye on the door because there's somebody coming in right there. I think, that door seems to get stuck a little bit, so maybe somebody can come in. Hello and welcome to our session. Our session got moved around a couple of times, so I'm glad you found us. I'm Sarah Joseph, Emeritus Professor from the University of California, Davis. And I'm going to have my colleagues on this panel introduce themselves. Just to start off, Zina Sawat from American University, Salam Murad from American University of Beirut, and then Chris Schrey, who was with the American University of Beirut when we started, but now is actually completed her degree and teaches with the AAB. They will also introduce themselves a little bit when they do their presentations. So I'm very delighted to welcome you this is actually the formal launch for a collaborative project that we've been calling Mapping the Production of Knowledge on Women and Gender in the Arab Region. And we've designed it as kind of a conversation. So each of us has a presentation and a demonstration to show to you, but we may be jumping in and sharing comments with each other along the way. And feel free at any point to raise your hand and ask for clarifications or explain what we did, because this was a project that went on for many years, and we're constantly correcting ourselves as we went along. So we'd love an opportunity to explain to you anything that is not that's not apparent or clear as we go along. And we're going to try as we go along to show you the ways in which we did, in fact, have to constantly self-correct. So the goal that we call the MPK project, Mapping the Production of Knowledge on Women and Gender in the Arab Region, so MPK, and that is the website, MPK Gen, for gender and women, -arabregion.org. This website is a satellite website of the Arab Council for the Social Sciences. We did this project in collaboration with ACSS, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. The goal of this project, the MPK project, is to develop a free public database of all of the academic literature and some gray literature on women and gender in the Arab region that was published. So we're just looking at scholarly literature and some gray literature that was published from 1970, and we wanted to put it all over the present, but we ran out of funds in 2022, so we've got 50 years of publications on women and gender in the Arab region. And we'll explain to you that we ended up focusing on the thematic of sociology, so we'll explain that in a minute. But just to look at the background, we see the project actually began in 2015. We went through many iterations, so some of us, I guess from the original group, I'm the only ones still here from the original group, it went through many iterations and reformulations before we got to define it as specifically a database development project. So to do that, we got initially a small seed grant from the Ford Foundation in Cairo. We did the planning, and out of that, we made the determination that this was going to be a mapping project and that we would be developing a database. And then we got a larger grant from the Open Science Society Foundation in Amman. We got that grant in 2019, just before COVID hit. And when COVID hit, they slashed the grant in half. So we were not able to do all of the work that we had initially intended to do under the larger grant. And the reason they slashed it in half was that they wanted to redirect some of their funding to COVID research, which we certainly could understand. So just to tell you what we actually did produce, we do have a database now that's publicly available, and you can go online and use it. I'm going to show you how to use it today. It has 20,000 references in it. Under the umbrella of women and gender, under sociologies. Again, we'll explain what all of these categories mean, and I'm going to explain how we came up with these kind of categories and what the categories, how one can critically assess, and how we had engaged in endless conversations in critically thinking through what were appropriate categories in order to organize the data. The database was built by going to other databases. We use the ProQuest platform, the EBSCO platform, and the Bielfeld platform. For those of you who may not know what those platforms are, they're basically just online platforms that have other databases on them. And from each platform, I'll tell you more in a minute, we took very close look at what databases those platforms supported that we thought were relevant to the kind of literature that they might house, that they might index, that would be useful for the database that we wanted to build. And we spent months and months and months just looking at the different platforms and looking at the databases that were on those platforms, and then made our choices. Ultimately, the database that we built was built using 11 different databases on those 3 platforms. I'll explain that in a minute as well. So I'm just kind of giving an overview right now. In order to do this, we had to develop, as with any database, in order to do this, as you do with any database, it's organized around keywords. Because the nature of a database is you're searching for something. In order to search, you've got to have keywords in the search bar. So we're going to talk about the ways in which we developed the search function, the search keywords, how we tested them, how we threw some out, how we added them, how we went back and forth to provide what we have now, which by no means is a perfect database. I think we will all emphasize this as we go along. There's a lot that can be done to improve this. In fact, we are very much hoping that by launching it, some team will want to look at this and say, let's build on it, let's improve it, let's add to it. And we designed it for that purpose. We were extremely careful in documenting all of the steps that we took. We've got document after document about every decision we made, all the methodologies, some of which we posted on the webpage, so it's publicly available, some of which we've held back for anybody who wants them. We are very happy to share them, so that if anybody wants to add to this database, all they have to do is ask ACSS for permission, because we built it, but we gave it to ACSS to own it, because we believe that ACSS is the best single organization for social science research. Our website, which you see up there, is a satellite website of the ACSS website. In order to even figure out keywords, we had to learn about Boolean operators. Do all of you know what Boolean operators are? Boolean operators are the tag words that you use in a database to search that database to get the results that you want. So there's an art to doing Boolean operators, which is making sure that you string the right kind of words together, and there's symbols that you have to use to say, you don't just use, you use Arab, you get everything that has A-R-A-B at the beginning of it, you get a star at the end of it, which you get everything else that has those additional letters in it, and there's all kinds of, and you use a plus to get Arab plus men, Arab plus women. There are all kinds of rules on how you do search, and those rules are, they're called Boolean operators. You put them in brackets, it means one thing, you put them in parentheses, it means something else. So all of us had to train on those sorts of things. We did set up Boolean operators for each of the search functions to test. And in order to learn how to do that, we brought in librarians from the University of California, Davis to train us. We all trained on them. Some of us already knew how to use them, some of us didn't. We also trained on Zotero. Zotero is a database manager, and we had to pay for that separately, and we still have it. And it basically stores the data until you're ready to use it. But you have to learn how to use that in its own capacities. And then we had to develop various kind of algorithms for coding. So we hired graduate and undergraduate students at my university who were computer science majors, and worked with them on developing algorithms for the coding that were also then used for the kind of charts and diagrams that we're going to demonstrate for you here today. In order to figure out whether these algorithms work, we had to do all kinds of testing. We call them blasts. We just put keywords in and see what those keywords threw, what the database threw back out at us. And if we didn't like the way they threw things back out, if we figured there's something wrong either with the algorithm or the Boolean operators, we had to go back and forth and make those kinds of corrections. So we were constantly testing and retesting and documenting how we were testing and retesting. As I said, we hired computer science students at UC Davis to then, once we had the database set up, once we had the exhausted the platforms, to actually see, well, what do we generate and what kind of patterns can we see here? And what kind of charts can this produce? Because ultimately the idea of doing a database like this that has 20,000 references in it about all of the research that's been done on women and gender in the Arab region over a 50-year period under the rubric of the sociologies was to see what patterns in the research are. Can we identify there are certain patterns in who was doing research, when they were doing research, what topics were they doing research on, what countries were those topics more research on, and so forth. And we have done some of those charts to show you the possibilities that can be worked out. The team, when we had finally, I told you that some of us started in 2015, but we really kind of hit the ground running by 2019. When we had our full team assembled, we would meet sometimes once a week, sometimes 2 or 4 times a month. Sometimes we met 2 or 3 times a week. It was always by Zoom. As I said, COVID had hit by then. The initial intent was that we were going to meet in person. In fact, in some sense, it was, to say, a blessing, because we got a lot more done by Zoom than we could ever have gotten done had we had been waiting to meet once or twice a year. But we were actually very intensely meeting, often 2 or 3 times a week, in different constituencies. Sometimes I would meet with our researchers separately, sometimes we would meet all together, sometimes we were teaming up certain ones of us and certain others of us. And throughout all of this, we were being very careful to document the methodology. We were keeping all of the researchers did what we call a Friday report. Everything they did that week, they documented with attachments and detailed instructions. We kept those to produce the methodology section. Our researchers, some of them have gone on to finish their own PhDs or their MAs, as Chris has done here. But we then teamed up to do, we did a soft launch of this database 2 years ago, in 2023 in January at AUB, and we did a soft launch that same week at AU. Then we did a virtual launch for some other donors in April of that year. The plan was to build a database covering all arenas of research on women and gender in the Arab region, and in that preliminary work we decided that the kind of classic ways of dividing research, sociologies, the economic and the political, was in fact the way the research presented itself. And when we applied for funding, we were only able to get funding for sociologies. But our full intent was, once we exhaust sociologies, we would then proceed to do searches for the political and the economic. But in fact, the funding ran out and we couldn't get more funding. So those of you interested, there's a whole arena there for you to pick up on, and we welcome any kind of conversation for those who might want to pick up on this project. But we're going to tell you more specifically what we mean by sociologies. And we're very well aware that you never can really divide the social from the political and economic. So we have tons of the political here, tons of the economic, but we, for efficiency purposes and both for our thematic purposes, we did divide into those 3 arenas. Okay, among the things that we had originally planned to do that we were not able to do, and I think one of the things that was most exciting about all of us working together, and we were 12 beginning, and then there being 10 of us working, so this is only part of our team here. I think, but one of the most interesting and wonderful experiences for me, and each of my colleagues here will be talking about their experiences, was the honesty and transparency and integrity with which we were building this database. We were very aware of the limitations and the constraints and the flaws, and the things that we wanted to do that we could not do. Among the things that we wanted to do, as I said, were political and economic, that we could not do. Among the things that we wanted to do that we intended to do, and we had done preliminary work on, was getting Arabic sources. And as you probably already know, there are very few databases in Arabic, but we scrounged and found them, and we were going to also build a database in Arabic, but we knew that was going to take an enormous amount of time because you have to have very different kinds of Boolean operators, different kind of search algorithms for Arabic and for English. And as I said, the money ran out. We had also intended to do a very thorough search of gray literature. We didn't get anywhere near as far as we wanted to do that, but there is some gray literature there. But given the nature of the databases that we used, they're overwhelmingly articles and not books. So I think even if we've been searching just under the socialities, that this database would be double what it is now. Those platforms have books in addition to articles, because in our fields, books is the way that people publish. So we've got book reviews, yes, but the books themselves, very few of them ended up in the database, not because we didn't want them, but because the databases that we were scouring to build this database did not tend to list books, but rather listed journal articles. But we had intended to go do a separate search for the books after we finished the articles. Again, once again, the funding ran out. So those are some of the things that we had intended to do, and there were other things that we intended to that we didn't get to, but I just want to put them out there. So let me just a few words about the background of this project. This is a collaborative project with the University of California Davis Arab Region Consortium. So it's a collaborative project that includes 6 universities: American University of Beirut, American University in Cairo, Lebanese American University, Birzeit University, American University of Sharjah, and UC, University of California, Davis. And if you want to know more about the consortium, feel free to go on my webpage. That consortium has done and continues to do a number of projects. One is on gender and STEM education, one is on refugee mental health. There's an extensive project that we did that's completed now on sustainable cities. You can look at that project, look at that consortium and all the other projects that it is doing. But just to tell you as I told you, the team changed over time, but the final team included Sada Murad, who's here, I introduced a little bit earlier, from AUB, Martina Reka from American University in Cairo, Zina Solat from Lebanese American University, Lina Mukari from Birzeit University, Noah Goli from American University in Sharjah as the faculty on this team. The researchers were Megan Classic from the University of California, Davis, Zaina Zakabi from Zaina Zaloul from Birzeit University, Chris Schreiby, who's from American University in Beirut, and Joe Abinan, who is Lebanese American University. So the final team had 10 of us who were working together. The purpose of the database was specifically targeting early career scholars and graduate students, although of course anybody can use it, including non-academics. Our goal was within the idea of democratizing access to knowledge. We're so aware that so many institutions do not have these resources, do not have massive libraries. So we wanted to put the references here together so that researchers could have a base that's publicly accessible and free. So we're going to have a demonstration, but you'll see that you can put in code words, you can make up your own code words, you can extend code words. Chris is going to document, show you how to do that. But the idea is to facilitate research of scholars in the region. That was our goal, that was our purpose. If you are at a university or an institution that actually has a subscription to these platforms, when the database spits out at you 5, 10, 20, whatever number of references, you can actually click on the article. It takes you directly to the article itself. If your institution has a subscription, and many of your institutions, like ABNLU, do in fact have access to these platforms. If your institution does not have access, you'll still get the reference. You'll know where it is and who's published it. And in cases where the abstract was publicly available, we've included the abstract to the article. ProQuest has intellectual property on their abstracts, so we couldn't include the abstracts from ProQuest, but EBSCO does not. So when references came from EBSCO or Bluetooth, we were able to put the abstracts up, but we didn't do a lot just for the abstract. There are a large number of codes or keywords that you can use to search the terms. You can, as I said, make up your own. We're going to go over the code words and the code book. And we'll tell you how we came about this. And so let me tell you where the specifics of where we got the references. So ProQuest was our biggest platform. How many of you, I'm curious, are familiar with ProQuest or ever use it? Okay, good number. So if you can use ProQuest, this is going to be very easy for you. So you may already know some of these databases. One of the largest databases in ProQuest, and we were consulting constantly with librarians. They actually produced for us what list of databases they thought were the most productive for us. And our librarian at Davis told us that he thought that sociological abstract was the best organized of the various databases. So we actually started with sociological abstracts, and we did all of our initial testing of the Boolean operators and the algorithms and so forth with a sociological abstract, only to find out that we went to Bielefeld, that those Boolean operators didn't work in Bielefeld. So it was constantly going back and forth. However, we spent an enormous amount of time with sociological abstracts, which includes, by the way, not just sociological articles, but it has a pretty broad base. Then we went to ERIC, which is a database for on education, because a lot of the research is produced under socialities in the ERIC region is actually done by educators and under the educational kind of thematic. We used research in Gender Watch, another database. On ProQuest, Research Language and Linguistics, another database on ProQuest, PsycInfo, which is another huge database, and I know some of you here are very familiar with PsycInfo, and another very well-organized database in the Academy. We didn't find as much in PsycInfo as we found in sociological abstracts, because there isn't as much psychological research as some of you know, but it's a very distinguished database. And then we did Index Islamicus, which is the database that the publisher Brill assembles. Those 6 were all from ProQuest. So basically we're going to do database after database after database, all on the ProQuest platform. And the algorithms that we developed basically for sociological abstract work beautifully for all of those, because they're all on the same platform and basically organized the same. When we finished those 6, we went to the EBSCO platform. And the nice thing about the EBSCO platform is that they don't claim intellectual property for the abstracts. So the references that came from EBSCO, we can get much more information on those references because we were able to include the abstracts. Our own background database has all of this abstract, but we weren't able to publish those that came from ProQuest because of the intellectual property claims of ProQuest. From the EBSCO platform, we gleaned references from Anthropology Plus, Historical Abstracts, and Women's Studies International. So 3 databases on the EBSCO platform. What we're finding from those now 9 platforms is that overwhelmingly they were America-based. So we wanted to see what database was the best one that would capture European research. There's an awful lot of research on women and gender in the Arab region has come from Europe. And we learned that the Bielefeld, the University of Bielefeld in Germany, is in fact considered the best database. And we went to them, and then we had to readjust, as I said, the Boolean operators and the algorithms for their database. We were able to get in the Bielefeld a little bit more French than we found in other databases. We had hoped to go into German and Italian and other languages, which we were not able to do. Those are the 11 databases from which we gleaned references. And just to share, and I think Chris will tell you a little bit more about that when you put in the search word in somebody else's database, it may throw out 100,000 references to you. And that's what our researchers were facing. They put a keyword, family, or kinship, or sexualities, and 100,000 references would come out. Well, of those 100,000, maybe 10 are relevant. or 20 are relevant. So it was months and months and months of work to go through doing the searches on the 11 databases to figure out which ones were relevant for the topics that we were working on. To do that, we developed thematics for what topics we were going to work on to include in the database. And we're going to leave that to Solomon to explain to the thematics. Although we're going to give you a demonstration of the database first, so the thematics, once we explain them, will make a little bit more sense. Once we had the database assembled as far as we were able to go, again, lots and lots and lots of more work to be done, and we really invite the conversation and the partnership for anybody who wants to pick it up from us from here. Then we wanted to start doing the analysis. So at that point, we hired computer science graduate students to help us with the actual mapping. And that meant giving them search terms to look through and put the results from our own database, not from the ProQuest or EBSCO, but the database that we have now constructed, which now has 20,000 references. We said, give us everything that was done on Egypt from 1970 to 2022, and it would kick out hundreds and hundreds of articles. Or give us everything on the family in all of the Arab countries, and it would kick out the hundreds and hundreds of articles. Or great, we've got all of the articles that were done on kinship between 1970 to 2022. Break it down by country. How many were in Egypt? How many were in Lebanon? How many were from Palestine? Or break it down by decade. Tell me how many were done from 1970 to 1979. How many from 1980 to 1989, and so forth. Lots of different ways in which you can configure the patterns or look at to see if there are patterns by telling the database, give me this kind of information and chart it out for me. And we're going to show you some of those charts because what we want to do is encourage you to do your own. You're looking at a topic, get to this database, find out what research was done on that topic, and generate your own charts about how many articles, you can find out all the articles done by a particular author, all the articles that were done by a particular publisher, and so forth. So our next steps were just to begin our own analyses of the kind of patterns that you would find in the database. And we're going to actually give an example of one analysis that's almost done. Zina Soares and myself have been working on identifying the patterns in the research on family from 1970 to the present. And we've been charting it out, and we're almost done with the article, so we want to share that with you just to give you an idea of what can be done. But we have about half a dozen different articles that different people on our team are working on. So what's the promise and the possibilities of this database? I think the possibilities are almost endless because you can just configure any set of keywords that you want, chart it against time, chart it against country, chart it against publisher, chart it against location, and so forth. So those are, for me, that tells us an awful lot, not only about what has been done. For me, what's more interesting, what has not been done. And one of my motivations of doing something like this, the expression I use is I really want early career scholars, graduate students, to stop digging in the same hole as their professors. And how do you do that? You see what they've done. Let's not do that again. Let's do something different. And how do you figure out what's been done? You get to the database. God, we've got 500 articles on this, and did anybody say anything new or interesting? No, let's go do something else, or rethink it. That's what, hopefully, the hope here is that you stop digging the same hole and find some other topic, some other project, or some other way to frame some other kinds of questions to ask. So the hope now is that we interest other teams to build on the database, expand the database, or all of you here to just use the database to back up your research or to inspire your research. So that's just kind of the background of where we are, and I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Chris Strady, who's actually doing a demonstration of the web page and the database, and from there, Salomon will explain to you the thematics. Explaining the thematics and the codes will make much more sense after you saw how the database works, rather than explaining it abstractly and then going back to the database. And after Assad explains the thematics and the codes and all of that, we're getting, we're getting an example of actually one project that we did and are almost complete with in terms of analysis of the patterns of publications on women, on family and household. Chris, my turn.
Can you? Hi, so I'm going to jump right into it. When you go to the website, you just click access the database here, and then you get this database. So I'm going to explain kind of how it works. Okay, so basically we have thematics, we have geographic regions, and we have years. So, as Dr. Joseph said, we organize things into 6 thematics. So think of these as gigantic themes. So we have class kinship. It's actually much bigger, quite endless really, but let's go with class kinship. Class kinship, race, family structures, that. Then we have media and pop culture, religion, sexuality and the body, space, war, displacement, refugees. So these are the big topics, let's say. Under each of these, you have a number of subtopics or code words. So I'm going to give you an example. If you click on media and pop culture, you have advertising, celebrity, cinema, discourse, language, education, all of these. If you click under sexuality and the body, you have all of these categories. So beauty, disability, fashion, female genital cutting, etc. So under each topic, there are subtopics, and we divided things also according to geography. So we have here 2 major, let's say, categories under geography. We have individual countries, so we considered all the countries within the Arab League, and we have regions, because like, for example, let's say I write na in the MENA region, I'm going to get a lot. So we looked at which regions are most looked at, like which words are most used to describe the region. So we have Mashriq, Maghrib, Middle East, North Africa, Ottoman Empire, etc. Okay, hala for the demonstration, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say I'm a graduate student and I'm looking into, for example, female genital cutting. And I want to look at the relationship between female genital cutting and something from the religion thematic, which is piety. I would just click on these 2 and then apply filter. We wait 2 seconds. So this will get you everything that has an intersection between female genital cutting and piety. Now, let's say, masalan, I have this article. The second I click more info, I get everything. The title, the authors, the source, the abstract, and under it you get tags. So you're gonna wanna look here. So when you look at the relevant codes, Djibouti, religion and sexuality, religion and education, sexual and reproductive health, let's say you're super lazy, you don't wanna read the abstract, you're super literatured out for the day, I don't know. You can just look at these and think, okay, I kind of know where this is going. So let's say I want to focus on female genital cutting as it relates to piety, not in urban regions at all. The second I see urban here, I can decide to, khalas, chuck the article, let's say. I don't advise this, it's quite lazy, but it's okay. Okay, hello. We can also obviously go by region. So I'm going to give another example. Let's say I'm interested in looking at, sexual and reproductive health in Lebanon. So first I apply filters and see what this gets me. 2 seconds. Okay. Let's say I only care about what research was being produced on this during the year of COVID, which was 2020, because as we all know, research took a big dip then. I would just filter out by year. So I would go to 2020, and it would reload and only give me the things that were produced on sexual and reproductive health in Lebanon in 2020, as you can see. So it's a great filtration system, which anybody here who's a researcher or an educator teaching students this is great because one of the biggest complaints you get when you're an educator or a researcher is that there's a mountain of research to go through, and it's very excruciating, especially because you get so many irrelevant results. So this is quite, basically, not to toot our horns, but we provided a shortcut of some type, which is quite necessary with this type of research. Hello. Okay, let's say the last thing-ish I'm going to show you with this. Let's say I'm interested, for example, I'm doing a project on Nawal Saadawi. I would just write Nawal Saadawi and I would search, but I don't care about the year, let's say. 1 second, where did she go? Okay. Sorry. The website is a bit slow. Okay. So you get everything in the universe, well, at least from our website on Nawal Saadawi. Also, you can limit this. So let's say I only care about what Nawal Saadawi had to say, for example, on female genital cutting. I would select this, apply filters, and see what I get. So essentially, the way you need to think about this is what tags would be under the article or articles that you want to look into, basically. There's a lot you can do here. I'm just going to give you a very quick spin around the website. So here you have the about, so about the project. How to, I'm going to just go to this very quickly. Okay. So basically here they tell you about the database and they tell you about the codebook. So I'm going to explain this very briefly because it's quite technical and can be stiff, let's just say. Okay. This, how many pages? This 63-page document is our codebook. So what does the codebook mean, basically? This is the, let's say, systematic encyclopedia, thesaurus, whatever you want to call it, that we developed in order to show you how we searched for things and how we conducted our searches in terms of technicalities. So I'm going to kind of give you a very quick example. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So here we have one thematic, which is class, race, minority, ethnicity. This is the endless one I was telling you about. Tribe, family, kin, care work, and social networks codebook. What does this look like? Firstly, we have the code term here. So this is the gigantic term, let's say. Inequity. Then here you have the key terms for the Boolean searches. So these are the things that we literally input into the databases that we were looking at in order to get things under inequity. So, for example, under inequity there would be balance, discrimination, disparity, equal rights, equal opportunity, equity, all of these things. So again, this is quite technical, but this basically tells you what ground we've covered in order to get to the results that we got to, and basically just how encompassing this database is, essentially. I will let you go through this one on your own because it's quite a big file.
Can you explain the third column?
Yes, sorry. Okay. Okay, 1 second. I want to go to. Okay. So the third column here would basically, I'll give an example. Under class kinship, once again the endless one, you would have the code term head of house, and then you would have what we looked at in order to generate things that relate to this code term. So control of property, family leader, head of family. So here, for example, this says, this code includes key terms referring to the head of household. This could refer to any gender or sex. When searching the literature, including a gender or sex term may help the user narrow search results. Example, female head of household, which is a common term in the literature. So let's say you don't want to use the database, but you want kind of a guide on how to conduct very specific searches. I would advise that you use the codebook, because through the work that we did, we kind of sifted out everything that was useful, not useful, specific, not specific, things of the sort. So think of it as sub-feed. This one?
Yeah. So just to complete
subcodes that you'll find in the thematic drop-down list. These are the subcodes of what went into the big thematic list, and this is the explanation. So we're trying to be as thorough as possible, so you know why we ended up with these, this is why we ended up with these, and how these collapse into this.
Exactly. Okay, so also on the website, if you go to publications and outreach, you're going to find our methods, why the Arab region, why mapping, why the production of knowledge, and why the selected thematics. So let's say you go into this, you're going to find an entire explanation of our rationale. Again, please feel free to explore. And just two things I want to say about this. At the start of the project, I and other researchers were very overwhelmed by the amount of technical labor that went into this. And thinking that research would be the easiest thing in the world, I underestimated how difficult this would be. But it really helped me kind of reshape how I think about research, even like kind of cementing anti-colonial approaches to my research that I didn't even know I was researching in colonial ways. It really wakes you up in weird ways. And two other things actually. Again, please share this with your students. I'm not like advertising or anything. I had a student last semester who was part of the MEPI program, if you know it. Now it's slashed, of course, because I'm Ethel. She was working on her paper and she was really overwhelmed with how many sources there were. And she chose to tell me that she wanted to use AI, to which I yelled at her, of course, and told her, please don't use AI, use this instead. Partially because we did the work of sifting everything, also because AI does not catch nuances politically, economically, socially, everything. And even if it spits out sources at you that aren't made up, it doesn't give you, it doesn't do the anti-colonial, queer-centric, disability-centered, whatever you want to call it, work that we did, essentially. So one very tiny example I have of this would be, so under sexuality, we have female genital cutting. There was an entire, I think, hour or hour and a half long meeting on why we chose the term female genital cutting instead of FGM, which is female genital mutilation, and how we should take an anti-colonial approach towards understanding this and categorizing articles under it. AI is not going to do this at all, and I keep saying AI because when I told somebody about this database, to my dismay, the first reaction they had was, oh, so AI. As if, no, not AI, because it's not going to do the political work for you, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's about it. I'm now going to go over to...
Go back up to the home page.
Yes.
And show the team.
Yes.
Let's show the team.
So this is us, if you... Okay. Basically, the website has every detail about this project that you could want, basically.
And go to contact, please.
Yes.
As I said at the beginning, although we did the work, we turned the webpage over to ACSS, there's a collaboration firm. So your contact is actually going to be with ACSS because they've made the commitment to maintain the webpage. They're not upgrading the database, they don't have a concept of that. We invite you to say to ACSS, we want to work on this, and we'll work on it, but the contact is ACS, not us, because ACSS owns the webpage. That's what we're doing. Is there anything else I can do?
Not that I know of. All right. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the thematics, the 6 that you see. It's good to have them, I think it's good just to have them. But before I start with that, I just want to say a few things about this project. So I mentioned this has been a collective, collaborative project, but I will flag a few other things about this, which is one that it is, we're this is a project about the production of knowledge. We are producing knowledge as well, and this is like what we would call transnational research. We talk about transnational research a lot, and you saw the team and you saw where we all were. So what this meant is that we've been, we did research across different time zones, different countries, different schedules. So there's, the idea of what transnational research is versus what in practice it means and it takes. But also to flag here that we're doing this research in very different political contexts, right? So yes, it took us a while for different reasons, and there were different phases that we can talk about more later. But also we were doing this work during a very turbulent time in the region, which gets me to the second sort of aspect I want to flag, which is that this is an intergenerational project. I joined the team in 2006. I had just started 2016. Sorry, I had just started. I had just started as a junior faculty at the UB, and I met these renowned established scholars in the field: Suad, Martina, Nawar, Eileen Kutab from Baghdad was also in the original team. So this kind of exposure to these scholars, to these thinkers, and then eventually we recruited graduate students. This is where I met Christy, and we worked together. So it's work among women of different ages, generations. A lot of mentorship happened in these like 1 hour and a half talking about FGM. This is just one example, right? So there was a lot of mentorship that was happening that in university spaces, it's not self-evident that you would find something like this, particularly in the field of women and gender studies. The third thing I want to flag is that this is a project that is grounded in the region. So BFZ, these are universities based in the region under under this UC Davis consortium. But this meant that we were from the region producing scholarship about the region of this kind of scope and breadth. And then the last thing I will say is that, and this is something Saad flagged already about, this is we're producing knowledge, but this is also a form of service we are doing, right? This is done with, we see the universities up there, but this is done with almost no institutional support, right? And it is motivated, we are feminist scholars, it is motivated by social and political commitments that we have, primary of which in this project is making this knowledge accessible in some form, right? We still sort of, in academia you hit the paywall, you hit the firewall, and yes, this is for researchers of all stripes, working in academia, outside academia. Not ideal because yes, you can give them access to the articles themselves, but a sort of small contribution in making knowledge more accessible. So now I will turn to the thematics themselves and how we went about why these thematics and how we came up with them. So the big theme of socialities, this is what we want to map. We needed tools to help us collect the data we are looking for. Thinking of these thematics, there are two reasons for why we needed them. It's a way to show how the field organizes itself. So we always keep stressing that this is not the way that we necessarily would see the field or envision it, but definitely one way in which we can organize the large sort of knowledge categories that we have within this field, and to also do the thematics because yes, phase one was mapping, but phase two was always about reviewing this literature. And this is something, this is like we need funding, so in case someone will fund this project. So to organize the analysis that we were foreseeing about this knowledge that we have collected. The thematics, the 6 that you see here, we didn't sit and just say, okay, these are the thematics. So initially, 2016, we had 2 in-person meetings, right? And we had these, and what you can do in person, obviously, is always very different from what's on Zoom. So we did these long brainstorming sessions where we just, threw out all of the different fields, issues, topics that we can think of under this theme of sociality. So like generating a really long list of subjects. And this list is informed by our respective disciplines. So we come from different fields and disciplines, from sociology, anthropology, comparative English literature, media studies, urban studies, geography, history, just to name a few. So basically, and this is important to flag, obviously this view is partial. It's very much informed by our own training, our own fields of expertise, but also by our own individual research interests. So it is based on what we already know about this field, and so we need to start somewhere, right? And so after generating this long list, we then so we went from the socialities to the very granular and the very particular, and then from this granular list, we created clusters, so grouping these different subjects, and this is how we ended up with these 6 broad thematics. You will see that one of them, and I will name them in more detail. So the first one is actually class, race, ethnicity, tribe, family, kin, and social networks. And you will wonder, why, grouping all of these things. Again, here we go to like the funding, the efficiency of the work. So we're 10 people, we have like 5 or 6 faculty members, and then 5 graduate students, if I'm remembering correctly. So each thematic was basically led by a faculty member and a graduate student. And this is how we divided the work. Obviously, some people had more work than others because we needed to be efficient. So we grouped things under one thematic. This is by no means how we would organize them, but this is how we were able to collect the data for all of these different important things, as the categories I mentioned. The second one was media and popular culture. The third one is religion, sexuality, and the body, and then the last one is also has multiple sort of sub-themes within it: war, displacement, migration, and violence, and then the last one is space. So, as you see, there's a lot of category work that is happening here, and we needed to make categorical decisions, but we know that these categories are constructed and they are flawed, but they were essential and necessary for us to do the data collection. Now in terms of the mapping itself. So as I said, there were different teams and doing the blasts and collecting, and then you will read and sort of discuss and revise for each thematic. But obviously the process itself raised critical questions about our thematic schematization and about the structure of our own work. Some thematics, as I said, can be broken down. You can think of other thematics. You may think that there are thematics that are missing, for instance, labor, right? But one way there was a lot of elimination work that was happening as well. So labor, we had thought that this would be covered under economics, but labor was also covered in the family, because some of the subcodes we had were things like care work or the division of labor. So just to flag these things in terms of what the thematic actually also hides, to just make them clear. And we use the code words under, like Chris showed you, the different code words to sort of aggregate the data, but then also to code it, to tag it, right, for the users basically, to make it accessible. These thematics, I would say that the intention was to capture major and active areas of research in the past 50 years. Some of them, like the family or religion, are long-standing, since the 70s you have research about these themes. Others, like sexuality and media, are more recent. So the idea was to reflect the sort of long established literature, the foundational literature, but also to capture more emergent and new approaches and trends. And the other thing we will say is that, and this was part of the objective of mapping, is to what it will allow us to see by looking at countries, at when certain topics or themes speak and where, is to connect the knowledge produced to the wider socio-political and geopolitical context. And this becomes, can we see the slide here? The thematics?
Yeah, we see this.
Just to give you a sense of when things spike, And so this is part, we envisioned it as part of the interpretive work we were going to do. So knowledge is not produced in a political and historical vacuum, basically. And this is also why we decided that there needed to be a thematic on war, displacement, and violence, for example. Especially given the last 10, 15 years in the region, we felt that this needed to have its own sort of thematic. Another thing, as we're setting up, what I want to flag about this is that, and in terms of the thematics themselves, the way we also envision them is to in a way, to reflect the cross-disciplinary nature of scholarship in women and gender studies. So our thematic organization takes the research subjects and topics, not the disciplines, as a departure point for the mapping process. So we're not interested in reifying or reproducing rigid disciplinary boundaries and curating this knowledge. And so we formulated the themes in a way that is also relevant for people outside academia, right? Who don't really care about the disciplines and who actually care about learning more about the specific subjects that they're interested in. So this is the chart to give you a sense. You see 2010, 2019. And you see the constant sort of increase across the different, and you will compare for each thematic, like when it dips and when it picks up. Yeah, just to give you a sense of the kinds of...
Just point
yeah.
out, so these are the thematics, color-coded, and these are the thematics in each decade. To explain, we stopped in 2022, but the algorithm was continuous, immediately generating 2029. The reason this is small is only 2 years. But you see, the point that Saad is making is, in general, the total increase in production scholarship on socialities, and specifically across all thematics. But you can see which topics were generating the most research, looking at the color code. That's something you can generate this chart and do so, or charts like that easily. To just decide what vectors you want to intersect with each other, and you can put a chart.
And the top one is the big thematic family, care, and class, as you can see in the chart. So cross-disciplinarity. Now I want to talk a little bit about mapping as an exercise. So mapping a field demands that we remain aware of the power in mapping. So in the initial stages of the project, we spent a lot of time reflecting on the quandary or the issue of how to operationalize the mapping, okay? And it's an ambitious project. And one question that we sort of kept asking ourselves is, what are the implications of working with the categories to which the field has been constructed without contributing to the reconsolidation of these categories? So these are the categories that we know in terms of how the field was built and developed, but in the process we're sort of naturalizing the categories. So we're very much aware of the politics of this, the work of the category work. But we aspire for this mapping to be generative of actually critical re-engagement with the kind of knowledge that has been produced, and to open up new questions. I also want to say something about the comparative work that this mapping project allows. And in thinking about the comparative research, we grapple with the idea that actually very little scholarship in the region about the region is comparative in women and gender studies, but rather is more often grounded in boundaries of nation states. Okay, so comparative work in the region, as we see it, has almost exclusively been done through the discourses of global development and governmentality. And the sort of neoliberal discourses on women empowerment and gender equality and the production of knowledge in non necessarily academic spaces. And this is the great literature that you're referring to, Sohan. So the hegemony of neoliberalism has domesticated gender and turned it into a sort of metric and produced knowledge in the form of data. And you think of things like frameworks like the Millennium Development Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals as vehicles through which this question of gender justice or gender equality gained some kind of visibility, and in the process became depoliticized. All this to say there needs to be comparative work outside the framework of global developmentalist or environmentality. And the mapping project, hopefully, it would allow something, more comparative approaches to the literature. Finally, no, not finally, actually. So we really invite you, when you look at this, and Todd, you mentioned this already, this shows you what has been done, but to think about the silences, right? What hasn't been. So it allows you to see how, why, and when, and actually our review after the mapping has been done, so the kind of the next phase, which is reviewing this literature, is to critically, the purpose of it is to critically engage how, why, and when certain subjects and topics become visible or are made visible in specific times and places. And to also invite people to think about the silences that certain national libraries produce, or which topics get most coverage in Egypt, for example, versus in Lebanon. So being aware of what is made legible and what is made illegible in the process of knowledge production. This is my last point, and this is where I will conclude, is that there are alternative ways to map knowledge. So this is one way we went about it. Other things to map are who is producing this knowledge, who as in nationality, location, gender, who is actually behind the knowledge. Yet another way is to think about which countries this knowledge has been produced in, but also which disciplines and which journals, right? Like where in women gender studies in the Arab region, like which disciplines and which journals have sort of produced what kind of research. So I'm sure you can think of more ways to map. And I want to hear, and this is maybe where I'll end, is to go back to another mapping project that originally, in the very early stages of this project, we had wanted to do, which is the mapping of gender studies programs in the region. So to think of the pedagogical, educational aspects, right? And there are some mapping exercises that have been done. One I will mention for those interested is by UN Women, and it was done by Marie Stedros and Akram Habib in 2015, a mapping of women and gender studies programs. So it gives you a sense of the titles, the degrees, the methods of assessment, the required courses, etc. I still think this is a very important endeavor, particularly because women and gender studies as a field is very precarious. Precarious in the sense, and very fragile, in the sense that it gets affected by questions of funding, it gets affected by the political atmosphere. One day you have a program, the other day, it simply disappears. And so, and I'm saying this because, who is actually doing this research on women and gender, and what kind of, institutional presence does this have, and why it's important to have it. Questions, like COVID or the Ukraine war, the slashing of funding, suddenly gender is not interesting anymore. So the question of funding and the question of institutional support maybe are two things to consider.
One of the things I in a survey that we also began to do and we went carry through was to, when we were thinking about mapping all of the research programs, was to map all of the knowledge producing centers, NGOs, civil society organizations. We actually created extensive lists of every civil society organization that was a knowledge producer throughout the Arab region. The intent was we were going to contact all of them, see what databases we had, and include their databases in our database. We didn't get to do that from them or not, but we did take that step of trying to identify all of the out of the non-academic sites of knowledge production. Because we think that very often some of the most interesting things are done outside of the academy, and these civil society organizations themselves often are sites. So our next speaker will be Dr. Zina Sullivan, and Zina actually is going to give an example of the kind of analysis you can do by looking for patterns of scholarship that are produced over time and place.
Thank you. Thanks to my colleagues for these great presentations, and thank you all for your patience. I know this is like the last panel, second last day. Okay, but so what I will be presenting is an example, again, as Saad just mentioned, of how we can use this database to generate data and review of specific topics related to women and gender in the region. Okay, so Saad and I are both anthropologists. We're interested in kinship and family. We were interested to see what we can glean on the topic of family, okay, in the region over those 50 years, okay? So what we did was using relying on Saad's research assistance back in Davis. What we did is cull all the references in the database under the code word of family, okay? And then we realized that it was missing considerable research, and then we added head of household and marriage to search for references, okay? And all these codes were essential for capturing all the critical scholarship on family from the database. Okay, so why family though? As you can see from this chart here, you can see that family claims the largest number of publications in the database. Okay, so family is part of all the bars that are in blue. Okay, so why would family claim more publications or more knowledge production than let's say religion in the region or media pop cultures? The simple answer is that family is a center of society, especially in the Arab region. Okay, and it's not just central to sociality, but it's part of everyday life. It's embedded in politics, even in religious discourse. It's one of the most, if not the most, written about topics. Family drives the economy, and even scholarship on health pivots back to family structure, status, and dynamics. And specifically within the Arab region, maybe family stands out because of the absence or small role of the state in social provision, social service provision. People still depend on family for economic, social support, health support, recreational spaces. Even in the political arena, family networks lubricate connection and access. Okay? And it's not just for all of the hosts of these kinds of negative reasons that family is central, but also it's central for the high social value, moral value, ethical value placed on family. Okay, so it's the core of social life. And this mapping, again, is under the broad rubric of socialities. Okay? So let me take you to this then, this mapping. So this is the kind of data that you can generate from our database. Okay? So this is a mapping of all the literature or knowledge produced on family, okay, over these 5 decades in these countries. Okay, so what are the kind of general trends or overall trends? Very briefly, is that you'll see that Egypt, Morocco, and Palestine lead with regards to research on families. Okay, there are many reasons for that, which I will get into shortly. But keep in mind that Egypt remains and still is the most populous Arab state. Okay, and Palestine is still in its 80th year of fighting settler colonialism, genocide, apartheid. Okay, so those are the countries that really lead in terms of knowledge production on family in the region. Okay, a lot of the research obviously ebbs and flows given the national context or regional context. Okay, and then you also have the global context, especially with all the feminism and women's movements that have been happening over the decades, and I will get into them shortly. Okay, so what I will do now is I don't want to take more of your energy and attention, but I'll take you decade by decade, kind of shedding light on on the leading countries in regards to knowledge production on family, kind of the context, geopolitical context of that. Okay? Yeah, sorry. No, it's okay. Okay? So we started this database, obviously started.
ما قلت في اللابتوب عندك؟
No. So, starting with the 70s.
يلا لا
Okay. So the 1970s was the first major surge of research on the Arab region in general and on families specifically, okay? So one of the possible reasons for this surge is the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, which focused considerable attention on the region intellectually and politically. 1975 was also the first UN International Conference on Women, right? Those conferences that were held every 10 years, every decade since, okay? Those conferences brought women together from all over the world into conversations about conditions and realities, and over the decades, a lot of feminists and women from the region participated in those conferences. In 79, you also had the adoption of CEDAW, right? The Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was adopted by the General Assembly. So CEDAW and all these UN conferences required national reports from each country on the status and conditions of women, okay? As I previously mentioned, so in the 70s and over the decades, Egypt is again the main leader in knowledge production on even women, gender, and family specifically, with the exception of 2010 and on, probably because of the ramifications of the Arab uprising, okay? In the 70s, you have Egypt leading, Tunisia, Morocco, and the Sudan, because the Sudan had also a long history of anthropological research on pastoral and tribal societies, which, you know, carried on for a few decades, okay? Then in the 80s were an important decade for gender and women's studies because they saw a lot of institutionalization of women's studies programs all over the world, okay? And you also had the Nairobi conference in 85 that also triggered more research on gender and women and family in the Arab region. In the 80s, you also had, with the help of Saad Joseph, the establishment of the AMUs, the Association for Middle East Women's Studies, in 85. And so that was, again, a key decade in kind of growth of women's movements and conferences and international organizations. Again, Egypt is in the lead. Egypt followed by the Sudan and Morocco, okay? Again, this was Egypt after the Camp David Accords. And after the Camp David Accords, Egypt became the second largest recipient of US aid in the world, right? And still is today, right? So a lot of that aid and a lot of that investment went towards research, okay? So that's probably one of the main reasons why Egypt continued in that decade to lead on research with Sudan and Morocco behind. Not much changes in the 90s, okay? You still have this Egypt and Morocco in the lead. You have a major flourishing of research on Arab families in that decade. Notably, in that decade, you had the 1994 conference on the population conference held in Cairo, Egypt, when they were obsessed with population control and women's fertility. So a lot of research was published on women and family and health in that decade. Keeping in mind that even in Egypt, the fertility rate was 4.9 at 4.48 births per woman, one of the highest in the world. And then you also had the UN conference in Beijing in that decade, the very famous Beijing conference, where First Lady Hillary Clinton declared that women's rights are human rights. In the region, you had the establishment of many NGOs. You had the Bahithat in Lebanon, and all of these organizations had been working prior, but they were formally registered and established in the 90s. So the Bahithat was founded in 1992 in Beirut, Kauthar in Tunisia in 93, that supported a lot of research on women and women's empowerment. You had the Women in Memory Forum in Cairo in 95. Okay, so all of these organizations obviously published research in journals, newsletters, and all kinds of publications. Okay, so so I'm not going to add much more to that. You just had a lot of also during that decade, you had a lot of social scientists being trained in Egypt, in Morocco, abroad and in their home countries, and those abroad were coming back and conducting research on families. Right, and the Palestinian Accords also brought with them hope and promise of the Palestinian state. So you have more and more research on family in Palestine in the 90s. Okay. And then in the 2000s, you have a lot of research. You can tell by you really have a flourishing of research and knowledge production on family, With the largest numbers of articles, again, were Egypt, Morocco, Palestine, followed by Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. Again, you have more and more attention on the region. You have, this is the post-9/11 climate, right? People became obsessed with the region and the culture of the region and how they treat their women, right? Because they wanted to explain the 9/11 attacks. So you also had, and during this time, you also have even more funding on women and gender, right? Because you have the US and Europe funding research and towards democracy and development, but you have notably during that decade, that's when you have MEPI being established. So the United States Department MEPI Initiative, the Middle East Partnership Initiative, that then funds generations, but like so many students to study and train in the region, okay? And then produce more research on women and gender and family, okay? Yeah, the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies is founded in 2005 also, so you have really notable and key journals on women and gender and family in that decade. I don't know. You guys get the idea. I just one more thing to know, because not much changes, but I want to show you how in the 2000, like you can see in the last decade that we covered, you can start to see how the Gulf states then start producing. You see a lot of knowledge coming out of the Gulf states, okay? And there are many reasons for that, right? You have more satellite campuses in that region. You have many states in that using women to kind of soften the face of the state internationally, especially Saudi Arabia. And then you have institutions specifically devoted to women and gender and family, especially in Qatar, and the Qatar Foundation, and they even have the Doha International Family Institute. So you see the Gulf states kind of starting to catch up with other states of the region in terms of knowledge production. So I just wanted to also emphasize that. Okay? Thanks. So this is an example of all kinds of kind of reviews that you can do, or data and reviews you can generate from the database. This is just one thing we did focused on family. So like the world is your oyster.
Thank you, Zina. That's basically just a demonstration of one kind of analytical article you can do using the descriptive data of simply what was published, when was it published, where was it published, on what topic it was published, who published, and so forth. So the database is filled with all kinds of descriptors that you can just plug in to code words and generate your own kind of inquiry into what patterns of publication there is. So it tells you what has been done, but also, as I noted, you point out what has not been done. I take particular pride in trying to, we did a run to say what specific journal, any single journal that has been responsible for more publications on women gender in the Arab region turned out to be the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies, which I was particularly thrilled about because I co-founded it. But it tells you those sorts of things, really look. And it gives you a social history of scholarship. And I think that's really important for us to understand our own genealogies as scholars, and for those who are training scholars, is so that they can locate themselves within the genealogy of the field that they have embedded themselves in. So let's open the floor, questions, comments. Let me just also say, it's an imperfect database. It will always be imperfect, but we hope that as you use it, you'll find ways to make it better. And if some of you want to team up and get a grant and work on this, we welcome that. And we give it over. By the way, anything you do with this database, any article you write, is your intellectual property, but please cite the database as your source. It's yours. It's yours to use. So questions, comments, applause for the database.
Yes,
It was a team, truly a teamwork. We're only 4 of a team of 10, and they were, as Saad also noted, there's an earlier team who, for various reasons, weren't able to continue. In the very early period, we actually were located within what is now called the Arab Institute for Women at LAU. They hosted all of our meetings in the first years. including feeding us and taking care of us. So there have been many, many scholars, both junior and senior, working this collaboratively for now, from 2015 to the present, we're talking about 10 years. This is probably about 10 years of work. Comments, questions, thoughts? Yes, please give us your name, and if you want to direct your question to a particular person, please.
Sarah Simeoni, I'm a research assistant in the Gender and Development Program in Cairo University, Faculty of Economics and Political Science. First, thank you so much for laughing. We're trying to map. We're trying to map our what do our students research at the moment, and what are your interests? What have been your interests for the past 10 years? This is very, very, very exciting. You mentioned that you have did some sort of mapping for all the other knowledge production centers that are not necessarily academic. Is this list available, like, in one way or the other?
So, I mentioned
We did not, we created a list of other knowledge producing centers, but we did not go after them. We didn't have time or money to go after the databases.
But the list itself is there.
We have those.
That was my question. And the other thing, can those centers or maybe like other universities add to the database, like their projects or their
Link to
papers?
it. You could link to it. If you want to actually add references to it, you have to work with ACSS and the ACSS IT team to add.
Okay.
References.
So that's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we have to, I mean, this was in time, somebody was
On the database development.
Please tell us who you are.
My name is Pascal. My question is, does this database include other medium than text?
Such as, videos, films.
Like, yeah, films, videos.
If they were, not much, if they were in the databases that we glean in ProQuest, EBSCO, and RealGo, and if they were appropriate for our topics, we try to include them for the learning and scholarly work.
but also, like, I will tell you, like, in media and cross-culture thematic, you will find in it, like, reviews of things and articles about things. So, this is where they appear, but it's mostly textual.
Okay. And we don't have much time. I'm Maria Hanoun. I'm a postdoc at the University of Exeter, and I'm the managing editor of Merit. Thank you all for this work and this presentation. I would love to hear you talk, even for briefly, about both Suad and Sada mentioned the silences and the gaps that this research exposes. So for each of you, I mean, how has this informed either, what really stood out to you as silences and areas of inquiry that you would push yourselves or your students that came out of this project? And for me, even just looking at this presentation, obviously the most prominent ones are geographical, especially like Eastern African countries that are Arab, and just the Turkic literature and Libya. But I'm curious, what kind of has stood out to you in this work?
Any scholarship that fit under our categories and Libya, Somalia, all those countries is here.
Yeah.
So you have to say, why was there not so much search on them? But let me have each person respond to what you thought were surprised to find as gaps.
First, I want to think, like, the first thing, because this requires, you're asking a question that is precisely about why reviews are important, why this raw data alone is not enough. And so this is like a quantitative, right? Like, it was also like a trip to be on a quantitative project. But this is the kind of qualitative reviews, scoping reviews, like in-depth detailed reviews of like reading the actual literature. Like there's very little you can glean from reading an abstract. And so like this is an example, like another article we are supposed to be working on with Joe, who is actually now doing her PhD at ALS, is like a comparative study of research on LGBTQ across Egypt, Lebanon, and Palestine. So I think that this kind of in-depth qualitative work is essential to answer this question, right? Because the initial sort of the discrepancies between the countries is the first thing that stands out, right? Like we had one whole discussion about why is Djibouti completely absent. So like this is one, and remember we had
It became a code word for Djibouti.
So the first, the initial sort of discoveries are about countries and region and national discrepancies. But this is, your question is precisely what we want to answer and what we invite you to answer as well.
Before I give it to Chris, remember the way the database works is only on the basis of the words that are in the database. So if an article covers Lebanon, but it's not in the title or in the abstract, it's not going to kick it out. So there's a lot more there than it may necessarily kick out, which is why we are going through an after reading for the articles that Zena and I are doing on the family, Sada and Joe and Chris are doing on sexualities. They're actually going through and reading the articles. So if you're, again, I want to emphasize, if your institution is subscribed to the platform, you actually get to the article. So imagine how much time that saves you. But so there's much more there than is necessarily kicked out by the code word, because it's not in the title, and we don't have any of the abstracts from the Progress, those 6 databases from Progress. We don't have the abstracts because Progress claims intellectual property, so we could not use them. That means we're relying entirely on the title. So if the title doesn't specify all the topics and in the countries, you're not going to get it, but from the articles that was kicked out, but it's there in the database. You just have to find ways to get at it.
Sure, I can give like one very brief example since we're going to be doing the article on LGBTQ in Egypt, Palestine, and yes. So just, what I want to say is, I know this is very obvious, is what happens in life is pretty much replicated in the academic literature. So one example of this under LGBTQ would be that a lot of literature on this is surrounding gay men in the region. Queer women are invisible because they don't exist, of course. Whenever there's research on anything related to transness, it's lumped under LGBTQ. It's never specific research on trans identities, experiences, things of the sort. And if it is, it's hyper-medicalized, let's say. So, why am I saying what happens in real life? Much like how in real life the kind of the loudest spokespeople of LGBT things are gay men who are often very easily platformed, easily financed, easily whatever, the same thing pretty much happens in academia. So I would say that the silences are taken from real life and pretty much implanted into academia in very similar ways. This is what I've noticed at least.
I'll mention one. Yeah, no, still answering the first question. One that I was disappointed in is those of you who know my work, I work on the self-help and personal subject, really zero. You can't search that term because almost never does anyone put in the subject in the title. But is it in the literature? It's all over the place in the literature. Probably one of the most written about topics in one way or another, but it's not going to kick it out because it's not in the title. So those are the things you just have to be aware of and work with.
My name is Kurusa Barakot, and I'm a postdoc at UC Louvain, Belgium. First of all, congratulations. Really, I'm super happy to see this amount of work, and I can't even imagine the amount of research that can be based on this. So congratulations and thank you. I have 2 questions. One, like a bit technical, about did you also include the keywords that usually written in after the abstract with the title, or just the title? And my second question is about the language of the articles / abstracts, because I was going through the database while you were presenting, and I was surprised the amount of French articles in comparison to English. I mean, for me, I was just checking Egypt, and I was really, this is completely against my expectations. So this is super interesting, and I would like also if you to share any insights about this, and also to ask you if you considered having a filter by language, if this is possible, and if you also included, Dr. Joseph mentioned that you didn't have time and fun to also cover other languages, but I don't know if you covered Arabic. I didn't get. Okay.
We intended to.
I'll just respond. We created a list of the databases that we were aware of or could find that are in Arabic. That was going to be our next project when we ran out. So we didn't get to that, but we know where some of those databases are. In terms of the keywords, we use those keywords in the abstracts to help create our codes. So we don't necessarily have every single keyword in every single abstract, but they guided the kind of keywords that we created. We don't have a football language, don't we?
No,
Because we don't.
but on language, like the thing is, like for example, if you're thinking of North Africa, then like this is where you will find a lot of the literature. So this is why it's important to consider language.
But there is no filter.
No, there isn't.
Overwhelmingly, the databases that we used were English-based. That's why we decided to go to DFL, because almost everything on ProQuest and EBSCO is English-based, although they do have French sources in it. Very little German, Italian, Indian, or Spanish, anything else. But DFL did. So we had a couple of our researchers actually were French fluent, and they were put to the task of identifying which articles were relevant to the French articles that we looked at. Okay. Other comments or questions? I'm just curious, how many here are students? Graduate students or okay. Can you find this useful for your own research? How many of you are faculty or scholars? Will you recommend this to your students?
Of course.
All right, I first mark it.
Bravo.
One more question over here.
Hi, I'm Maris Toledo. I was curious more about the decolonization of the process.